a nationally recognized presidential historian, an award-winning author and political commentator, and a very long-time friend of the former President Jimmy Carter. Joining us right now is Dr. Larry Cook. Dr. Cook, I really do appreciate you taking the time to join us, sir. How are you?
I'm great, Brian. How are you?
Doing good. I really appreciate you taking the opportunity to join us. I'm sure there's a lot of people that have been wanting to talk to you. What was your first reaction? I'm sure it was a lot of sadness, and I'm sorry, by the way, for the loss of your friend. Did you, I don't want to say assume, but did you see this coming, or a little surprise? Obviously, he's 100 years old.
Yeah, again, thank you for your kind words. I appreciate that. And yeah, of course. I mean, we were good friends for over 20 years, and so even though we knew this was coming at some point, he'd been in hospice almost 2 years. We were, it's still you're never 100% ready for it when a good friend or family member passes away. And so, yeah, the first reaction, of course, was some sadness. But then we're comforted by the fact that we know that, he's with Rosalind now, and that's where he'd want to be. So, but yeah, like I said, the first reaction, sure, loss of a good friend.
Absolutely. No question about that. That makes sense to me. Do you recall the last conversation you had with President Carter that you can maybe share with us?
Yeah, the last real conversation I had with him was at Rosalind's birthday party in 2022, in August of 2022, and we had a big birthday party for her in Plains, and he was able to come out then, and that was one of his last public appearances, other than at her funeral. But we spoke then, and had a little conversation there at her party. I did see him at her funeral, but didn't get a chance to talk to him.
Right. Yeah. If you're just joining us again, Dr. Larry Cook, decades a friend to Jimmy Carter, who passed away at the age of 100. So I don't want to get into a political conversation, but I have criticized some who have gone after Jimmy Carter's family, which I think is beyond, inappropriate, Doctor. If you recall, there was a moment months back before the election where the family said Jimmy Carter's wishes is he wanted to vote one last time, right? And he wanted to vote for Kamala Harris, which he did. And then there was video of him at a park with his family in a bed. The man's 100 years old, right? He's not going to look like a spring chicken, right? That's obvious. But yet there are people that took the opportunity yesterday, Doctor, which frustrates me. I'm sure it frustrates you as well, to go after his family, saying that they used him as a spectacle, which I don't know the family anywhere near as well as you do, but I believe that's the last thing Jimmy Carter's family would do. Can you speak to that at all?
Oh, absolutely. That would be the last thing that they would do. That using him for anything would be nonsense. So yeah, he's a great man. He lived his life with decency, as President Biden said yesterday. And his whole family, I know many of them. I don't know all of his family members, but some of them I consider very good friends, and they all, they're all a chip off the old block. I mean, they're all decent people, really great people who do a lot for anybody around them, and do a lot to help his legacy as well. And so no, Yeah, that I think the time you're referring to that was at his 100th birthday, when they wheeled him out to watch the flyover, and that was something that was historic and very important, and I'm sure he enjoyed seeing that tribute to him from the Navy.
No question. And as I've said on the air, I've said on social media, I had the opportunity to meet him over 20 years ago, and I'll never forget it for the rest of my life. Do you have any type of understanding of who you think Jimmy Carter would want to speak at his funeral? And do you have any inclination of who that might be?
I don't. The only thing that I know, we have not received any details at this point ourselves. So I don't know. I know it's been in the news that President Biden had said that President Carter had asked him to do the eulogy. But I have not heard anything official. that.
You know, Doctor, I remember John McCain's funeral. If you recall, George W. Bush and the Obama family. It was one of the nice pleasantries where you saw two former presidents and their families sitting next to one another, getting along with one another, showing class, right? Because that's who John McCain was. He was a man, at least in my opinion, of dignity and class, and he was a hero, like a Jimmy Carter in that aspect. And again, you knew Jimmy Carter so well. Do you feel like that's the way Jimmy Carter would want it to be? You'd want Republicans and Democrats there, you know, exchanging pleasantries and leaving politics aside. Is that a fair
Oh
characterization?
yeah, I think that's a fair statement there. I'm sure he would want that. You know, he attended every inauguration from his own all the way up until he couldn't physically do it anymore, which would been the 2020 inauguration that he was the first one he had not been at since you know, his own, and then he attended every single one, whether it was Republican or Democrat being sworn into office. So I think that's the proof right there that yeah, absolutely he would want that. As I mentioned, we were at Rosalind's funeral when she passed away in November of 2023, and we had every first lady there at that funeral, and also President Clinton and President Biden, and of course President Carter was there at that funeral.
Yeah, that's the way it should be, no doubt about it. You know, I went through the list of just some of Jimmy Carter's accomplishments, and I laugh because it's like I'm not sure there's anybody else in the world that has been able to accomplish what he has, besides just being the president and the entrepreneur. And how about married for 77 years, serving the country, graduate work in nuclear physics. I mentioned the Nobel Peace Prize, right? An author of over 30 books. I don't know how he had the time to do that. Habitat for Humanity volunteer, Sunday school teacher. I mean, I'm sure there's probably a lot we could add to that. But I laugh at that and I say, boy, I don't think I know anybody that's accomplished more in their life than Jimmy Carter did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can add a couple things to that. He was a master woodworker. He had a woodworking shop in his home, in his garage in Plains, and he's made, you know, major pieces of furniture. I'm fortunate enough to have a couple of things that he made there in his workshop. He was a very good artist, had a folk art quality to his art, done a lot of painting. As you mentioned, he's an author, but not just an author, but also a novelist and a poet. With that, he's an avid fisherman. Fly fishing was a very big part of his life, and Rosalind's. And yeah, he was a master of anything that he attempted, and he was always up for attempting something new.
Wow. Unbelievable. I didn't even know some of that. That's incredible. So, Dr. Cook, you knew him, you know, much better than 99.9% of the world. And obviously, I'm an outsider looking in, and I can read off all of his accomplishments, and I love hearing stories about him. But what can you share with people that people didn't get to see or hear from Jimmy Carter in private, in your conversations with him and in spending time with him over the years? How do you think he should be remembered? And what are some of the things that you remember that maybe the general public might have not been able to see?
Well, the first thing I would like to say to that is he was a genuine person. He and Rosalind. You know, you almost can't talk about one without talking about the other, because they, as you mentioned, their long marriage and their partnership with truly everything that they did in life, from the time that they got married when she was a Navy wife. I mean, she was, you know, essentially in the Navy with him, being a Navy wife, and right up through the years. And so I guess I'd like to get across to people that he was very genuine. I mean, you know, when we would get together over the 20 years, we've been together countless times. And, you know, the first thing that when we get together, he'd want to know how things were going. He'd want to know how my history work was going. He'd want to know how my parents are, and how my wife's parents were doing. And you know, people assumed that when we got together, we talked about politics. We rarely talked anything political. He would, you know, would be just like two friends talking. You know, how's your mom? How's your dad? You know, that type of thing. He met my parents several times. So he was a genuine person, and everyone that he met, whether it was a friend like myself, or whether somebody that he was meeting for the very first time, he was interested in them as a
Mhm.
person. He didn't make it all about himself in any form. He
Right.
would be the first to ask you, how you were doing, no matter what your profession was. And he'd be interested in it. Um, I think the way that he would like to be remembered the most would be for his humanitarian work. He's very proud of that. And you know, I was talking to people earlier today about that, and I said, when they were saying that his humanitarian work kind of overshadowed his presidency somewhat, and that's true. I think his presidency is underrated personally. He did a lot of great things as president. In my opinion, he was a very good president. And some things didn't work out the way he would have liked them to work out. But he certainly gave it his all. But what you got to think of is when people say that about his post presidency, it's not a knock on his presidency. It's just that he had a long post presidency. I mean, the longest of any president. One of my favorite times with him is when I got together with him right after he had broken Herbert Hoover's record of being the longest out of the White House, and he was so proud of it. He couldn't wait to tell me about that. He had that famous grin, and he told me, "I just broke Herbert Hoover's record." And
That's
but he left the White House at 53 years old. He lived to be 100. He had almost half of his life outside of the White House, and he had such did so many things there that, of course, that's going to be a big part of his
yeah.
legacy.
Dr. Cook, I mean, obviously he had to have taken care of himself. I mean, he lives to 100. Can you speak to that? I mean, I would imagine this is a man who probably ate pretty healthy and he exercised regularly.
Yeah, you're right on both of those things. They were at our house several times for lunches or dinners, or we ate with them several times, and yeah, very very healthy. They really like to eat fish a lot. Going back to being an avid fisherman, he would eat a lot of the fish that they caught.
Mhm.
And yeah, exercise regularly. I mean, you can see all kinds of photos of him as president jogging with the Secret Service with him. When
Yep.
he was in planes, he and Rosalind were known to be out riding their bike a lot. He actually had a scooter that it wasn't no motor on it. It was a manual scooter that
Wow.
he would go down the road in planes with that. They love to walk. I mean, one time, and they were at our house here in northeastern Pennsylvania, and we were holding an event for them a couple of blocks up the road that evening. And after we got done with lunch, he wanted to walk up to the event and not ride up with the Secret Service. He wanted to walk up. So yeah, he lived a very healthy lifestyle, both physically and spiritually.
So cool. And married for 77 years. It's
Yeah.
just unbelievable. Again, without getting too much into the political spectrum, because that's not why I wanted you to come on, of course, but did he ever speak to you about divisiveness just in general? Because it seemed to me Jimmy Carter was the guy who was always willing to reach across the aisle and speak to somebody that disagreed with him. He showed respect for everybody. Did he ever speak to you at all about just the last decade, even of God? It just seems like we're so much more divided now, and you have Republicans and Democrats going at it with one another, and bills struggle to pass. Did he ever talk to you about that? Because I would imagine he's the kind of guy that never wanted it to be like this.
Yeah, we never really talked a lot of politics, and he never said anything divisive to me at all. Uh, I'll share a couple things with you, though. I mean, he was very good friends with Gerald Ford. And one time we were together, and in my office, I'm a collector of presidential memorabilia, and he saw a signed picture that I had of Gerald Ford, and he looked at the picture for a few seconds, and he said, "Wow, I really miss him." And
Mm,
he went on to tell me that they were very good friends. And he told me a story. He said one day, he said, "I'll tell you something you may not know about Gerald Ford." And I said, "Okay." And he said, one day I received a call from him, and he said, "Jimmy, I have a favor to ask you." And Jimmy said, "Sure, Jerry, anything." And he said, "Well, I want to ask you to do my eulogy." And President Carter said he was kind of taken aback by that question. And he said, "I finally came up with a response." And I said to him, "Well, Jerry, if you promise to do my eulogy, I'll promise to do yours." And so he was very good friends with him. Um, I mentioned the Herbert Hoover thing. Harry Truman was his favorite president of his lifetime. In fact, For the last several years, my wife and I have given him a piece of Harry Truman memorabilia for his birthday for the last several years. But he never got into anything divisive. I mean, we spoke about the 2016 elections when President Trump won for the first time, and as a matter of fact, we had lunch about 2 days after the election, and he just said to me, he said, I called President-elect Trump and congratulated him and offered any help or advice in the future. And he said, I called Hillary and gave her my condolences. So, so a few little tidbits there, but we never really talked politics a whole lot.
Interesting. And he never he never really brought up anything negative about what's been going on over the course of the last 7 or 8 years, not even January 6th or anything of that nature, huh?
He did not to me. No,
That's
he
the
did
man he
not.
was, right? He stayed out of
Yeah.
that stuff. He, picking up the phone and calling Donald Trump. Isn't that the kind of man that Jimmy Carter was? It didn't matter whether he disagreed with policy or even personal. As a former president, he showed dignity, right? He showed
Yes.
dignity and character and did what you are supposed to do as a former president, and that is congratulate the incoming president, whether you agree with him or not, right, Doctor?
Yes. Yes. That again, that's Jimmy Carter.
So
He
incredible. Yeah, that's who he is. Now, I have to ask you this, since you're memorabilia presidential historian. Can you tell us just? I'm just curious. Some of the stuff you have from like a Jimmy Carter, some of the memorabilia that you might have from a Jimmy Carter. Is there any way you can you can share that with us if that's okay?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I got some very special pieces. Of course, I collect memorabilia on all of the presidents, and we have one of the most extensive collections in the country. But as far as the Carter memorabilia, some things are very special to me. Of course, I have a pitchfork, a wooden pitchfork that he made, a full size pitchfork made out of hickory that he made in his workshop. And he told me the story of it, that a tree had fallen on their property. This was several years ago. And he and Rosalind actually drug part of the tree up to his workshop, and he made various things from it. And one of them was the pitchfork that we have. Probably my most favorite piece in my collection was they came to our house in 2013, shortly after President Obama's inauguration. And they carried in this very official looking bag. It had the presidential seal on it. And he and Rosalind said, "We have a gift for you and Diane." And so we took the bag and we opened it up, and it was their leather bound copy of their program that they had at Obama's inauguration.
Wow.
And they wanted us to have it for for our collection. And as fate would have it, I got to meet President Obama shortly after that. And I took the program with me and explained to President Obama that President Carter was a good friend and he had given this to me. And so President Obama signed it for me, and then President Carter also signed it. So that's a really cherished treasure in our collection that we have.
Wow. That's priceless. That's something you keep for the rest of your life.